All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we are going to talk about the $5 million fine levied against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and its investment arm, Ensign Peak Advisors, by the SEC. This comes in the midst of as far as the news goes anyway, a financial storm which started off a few years ago, where you had an advisor there at Ensign Peak Advisors, a money manager that was a whistleblower, air quotes here, on saying, hey, the church has a $100 billion fund here that is perhaps not paying all of its taxes. It's got to be used for charity. It's not being used for charity. They were saying it was used to buy beneficial life insurance company. It was used to build and develop City Creek. I'm trying to remember what the mall is called there, but City Creek, I think it is, the development there. And that's producing income. Both of those produce income. Where are the taxes? I don't know all of the nitty gritty on that, whether there are actually taxes being paid on that or if it's a problem, right? Where they're under an umbrella of religious exemption, but they're doing things that aren't religiously exempt. I don't know the answer to that question, but that started 3 years ago. There's also recently a new complaint that says that the Utah-based Faith has dodged more than $20 billion in taxes. I believe that has to do with City Creek and with beneficial life as well. We don't know if that's true at this point. A lot going on in the whirlwind here, and I think we want to break this down into what we know right now, which is not that much. But we're going to break it down so we get a better understanding of where things stand. We have, of course, on one side, the accusations made against the church that are supported, for example, of course, with the Salt Lake Tribune. And then you have the other side where the church came out with a PR statement stating why this is the case. They did give some specifics on this. And if that's true, and the Deseret News takes that angle of it, of course, then they seem to have some backing, right, of truth that, hey, this was managed in a certain way and some filings were made that perhaps could have been done better. So there is some mea culpa there, I think, from the church that needs to be investigated. And you know what? If there is some filing issues there, or if there's filing with in a way that the SEC does not like, remember, who's the SEC? The Securities Exchange Commission. They are a self-regulatory body that can levy fines in the investment world. It's kind of like the bar, right, would be in a state. So it regulates and fines and does a number of things, requires a number of things within that world, the financial world. It's not a criminal thing, and it's not a lawsuit, right? It's a fine by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Now, with that, I want to go first to the Salt Lake Tribune and talk about how their angle on this, which is not a surprise, but there's some things here that we really do need to consider. So if you look at their article here, LDS Church to pay $5 million for hiding stock holdings. I think that is very disingenuous. It's nuanced, at least. It's the wrong way to state this. They didn't hide the stock holdings. They filed the stock holdings. They're implying here that there are things that they own on their balance sheet that they did not disclose. That's not true. My understanding is that that is not true. What they had done is they had built a couple of companies underneath Ensign Peak Advisors. They used those companies to file the assets, which were now underneath those companies. So they weren't hiding the assets, but they were making it a little more difficult for people to see all of the holdings that the church has with Ensign Peak Advisors. And what do you think about that? First of all, what do you think about that? How transparent does the church need to be? We just got done talking about President Oaks and the Respect for Marriage Act. And, you know, how transparent should they be there with the members? How transparent? They seem to be very transparent with their outward messaging with that. How transparent does the church need to be? I'm one who says, I don't think it's really everybody's business to some degree. I mean, as long as they're filing everything properly, I don't think that you try to be as transparent as you possibly can. I don't think there's good reason for that. Now, you may have a completely different opinion of that. But, I mean, think about it, right? You've got all of these assets. I don't know how much. The numbers go down to 30 billion sometimes, 50 billion. We've heard 100 billion. Who knows what exactly it is. Do you want the whole world to know how much you have? And beyond that, do you care how much they have? One of the big arguments since this whistleblower came out a few years ago with the $100 billion fund that the church has is, why do we need to even charge for tithing? You had a prominent, highly profiled blogger and writer for the Salt Lake Tribune come out and say, I'm not going to be paying tithing anymore because the church doesn't need it. And they're going to give charity to somebody else, right? So there's this idea that tithing is directly related to what the church holds in assets, cash, investments, etc. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe that. What are we trying to do with the funds? When will we need them? Look what happened in 2020 with the stock market, right? It dropped way down, right? 40% within a couple of weeks, few weeks. It had dropped 40%. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. When is there going to be another COVID or something much worse? And what do we need to do? It's not just a rainy day fund. Do we eventually need to be building Zion? And what is that going to take to be able to do that? So I'm all for it. I hear $100 billion. I'm shouting for joy. I wish it was $500 billion. I wish it was $1 trillion. Look at these additional, look at these moguls with Amazon and Elon Musk and Facebook, etc., Bill Gates, and all this wealth that is accumulated in these areas, and the power that they have and the influence that they have. Why not have something focused on righteousness? An entity focused on righteousness that can kind of somewhere in there kind of balance that out a little bit. I'm all for it. So I have zero concern about the money that the church has. I have zero association to tithing with that. That has nothing to do with me paying tithing. Zero. It's not to keep the church afloat. That is a small purpose. There are so many other things that the church does, and I want them to do it. And I am a proud member of the church, and so I want to feel invested in what the church is doing. Right? That's very important to me. All right, now, back to the article. So, LDS Church to pay $5 million for hiding stock holdings needs to rebuild trust. Okay, well, the Utah-based faith went to great lengths, in quotation marks, to conceal the size of its portfolio. Could the IRS and the U.S. Senate take action next? They could. We'll cover that just briefly here. Let's go down and just dip into the article here. This is written by David Nielsen and Peggy Fletcher Stack. Here's what it says. The overarching drive of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to keep the size and scope of its wealth hidden at all cost is now going to cost it. You can see the way that this is set up already in this article. Not that there aren't issues here. There are issues. In a settlement announced Tuesday with U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, the Utah-based faith and investment arm Ensign Peak Advisors, right? That is the investment arm, EPA, have agreed to pay $5 million in penalties for failing to properly disclose past stock holdings. I know, to properly disclose them. That doesn't mean they didn't anywhere. Stock holdings, and going to great lengths to deliberately obscure the church's investment portfolio. The question is are they doing that to obscure it from the SEC? I don't think so, because they've got all of the assets in there. Or are they doing to obscure it from an outward-facing world where the church is a huge target, and we may not want everybody to know that there's a $100 billion fund that the church has. And I hope this isn't the case. I hope this isn't the case. And are they afraid that members of the church, knowing that there's that much money, would stop paying their tithing or giving donations? Because you see that all the time now, right? Reasons, and this is on the left and on the right. It really is not discriminatory to politics. But I've seen this online all over the place. The church has so much money, why don't they just pay for it? Instead of me volunteering this or doing something, I think there's probably a balance there to some degree, but I don't like the association. It bothers me. I don't like the association at all. To deliberately obscure the church's investment portfolio, the development came within days of a news story. This was just from a few days ago, revealing that the SEC was investigating the church and Ensign Peak. Under the deal, which appears to conclude the probe, Ensign Peak will pay $4 million, right? So that's the investment arm portion of it. And the church is going to pay $1 million within 10 days of the U.S. Treasury, or within 10 days to the U.S. Treasury. This is the filing here from the SEC. They failed to file forms that would have disclosed the church's equity investments. All right. My understanding of this is that this is technically correct in what they're saying. Ensign Peak Advisors did not file and disclose some of those assets. They filed them under the companies below Ensign Peak. So hiding, I don't know if it's the best word. Maybe it's even some asset protection. I know that world a little bit. And there could definitely be something there in terms of asset protection and dividing up the assets under other companies, under other LLCs. It gives you a little bit more of a veil of protection there. According to an agency news release, it was, and for instead, filing forms for shell, there it is right there. And for instead, filing forms for shell companies that obscured the church's portfolio and misstated Ensign Peak's control over the church's investment decisions. That's a real possibility. Right? The SEC did not like that. By putting it into another company down below, Ensign Peak Advisors, who is actually in charge of those assets now? Because they're probably still being run from those employed by Ensign Peak Advisors. My guess. And it's a little convoluted there. So they didn't like this. Now, here's the key, though. According to the church's press release, in response to this, they've gone 13 quarters, right? That's over 3 years, where they have now filed it all under the proper place with Ensign Peak Advisors. So this is something that they're going back to 3 years previous in the way that the church was filing these things. That's what the issue is here with the SEC. Okay? Let's be clear on that. In its own news release posted soon after the SEC announcement, the church expressed its regret for what it termed as errors, and that investment returns, not members' tithes. That's interesting, right? Investment terms, but not members' tithes, would be used to cover the settlement. We affirm our commitment to comply with the law. I totally get that. They don't want to make people think like, the money that the church has a huge return on investment. A lot of dividends, yield from their bonds, cash producing assets. They've got plenty of money plus their own cash in the fund or liquidating stock, whatever it is, right? To be able to cover these things without pulling it directly from tithing funds. They want us to understand that. It does say, we affirm our commitment to comply with the law. We regret mistakes made and now consider this matter closed. So I wonder what they feel allows them to close the matter here. Are there going to be more issues? Probably not with the SEC, it doesn't sound like. But there could be some other issues here. Some Latter-day Saints were troubled by the disclosures. They didn't ask me about this. I would have said I'm not really troubled by it at all. But some Latter-day Saints were troubled by the disclosures. The church is far from perfect, but this feels beyond the pale. Come on. It legitimately acted badly here by deliberately trying to evade a law that applied to it. I can't see any light in this or any way to justify it. I'm not enough of an expert to think that the church, with its massive profile publicly, and this amount of money is deliberately trying to do a do-around from the SEC or for tax purposes with the IRS would be very surprising to me, right? I mean, come on. The church is naive to think the settlement is the end of it, the law professor said. The apparent hypocrisy is potentially harmful in its relationship with its members. Not me. The church needs to explain what it plans to do to prevent this in the future and to rebuild trust. Absolutely. That part of it, the reaction part against, again, the messaging, get the messaging right. Stop worrying about everything that the world is looking at. You have to deal with the SEC. You have to deal with the IRS. You have to deal with lawsuits. Fine. But on your messaging, when these things come to light, please be wise in your messaging to the members of the church. So again, who do they get here to talk about this? It's not someone on the positive side of this, or let's wait and see what comes from all of this. It's somebody else, right? That's the way the Salt Lake Tribune is going to run with this. And again, to a fault on the other end, the Deseret News is going to pretty much toe the line with what the church has said. They go to the point of saying, including the temple recommends whether members strive to be honest in all they do, right? As if the church is being hypocritical with this. I don't see that. Let's wait and see if there's any real foul play here. Again, I doubt it, but I don't know. This is not the kind of thing, Brunson said Tuesday, they can put behind them easily. Now, this is what they say the church is saying. For its part, the church relied upon attorneys to advise it on how to meet SEC rules, while acknowledging that it wanted to maintain the privacy of the portfolio. Okay, while it maintained that it wanted to maintain the privacy of the portfolio. Here's the question. Why is that so important? That's what I would want to know. What is the real concern? I get it. I'm a private person, believe it or not. I don't want my, dirty laundry, everything hanging out in front of the whole public. I want to protect my family. I want to protect information. I want to, I don't want all that out there. But this is a little different, isn't it? I mean, this is a $17 billion or 17 billion member church, or million member church that pays tithings and contributions. And so I'm just wondering, what is the motive for all of the privacy? Why try so hard? I can get it. I just would like to know personally what their motivation is. What do they see? Do they see that they need to, are they concerned about the privacy because of lawsuits? Because of people coming after them and shakedowns? And are they concerned about what the members think? I would just like to know what that concern would be and why they did that. So what they did here, they said that starting in 2000, the lawyer sought ways to comply with its reporting obligations. So the lawyers are telling the church, this is how we can be a little more private, not from everybody else, but from the world, right? Not from the IRS, not from the SEC, but from the world, and still comply with our reporting obligations. That's what the church is saying. As a result, Ensign Peak established separate companies, or LLCs, that each filed Forms 13F instead of a single aggregated file, right? Filing. Right? That's the deal. So they're not hiding assets. They just don't want people to easily go in and see Ensign Peak Advisors and here's everything that's under Ensign Peak Advisors. They're breaking it out a little bit into other companies. And again, there could be some asset protection issues here. That would not be surprising at all in helping them against lawsuits and helping them against actors in bad faith that they come across. It's a small but substantive fine. So $5 million, it's a pretty small fine for tens of billions of dollars, honestly. Okay. Now, I want to go to this right here. This is what the Salt Lake Tribune's podcast, Mormon Land, says here. And this is the question that do you think that this is an issue again? Do you think this is an issue? Here's their question. Does the LDS church simply have too much money? Does the LDS church simply have too much money. What does that mean? What does it mean to have too much money? Too much money for what? Right? Then they get a tax law expert. How do they find the tax law expert? That examines the faith's financial practices, the increased federal scrutiny it faces, and how leaders could put the issue to rest. This is also by David Nielsen and Peggy Fletcher Stack. They're the ones that I believe are writing this up, and then they do a podcast on this. Here's what I wanted to get to: is this paragraph here. Will these unflattering headlines about the church's wealth ever end? I think the answer is no. The answer is no, but that's not the point of why you do it, so that you can save face and worry about what the great and spacious building is doing. It's not the point of doing it. What might be the final outcome? Does this global faith of nearly 17 million members simply have too much money? It reported spending nearly $1 billion on charity in 2021. Could it and should it be doing more? How can the church avoid such unflattering attention in the future? Would further fiscal transparency, in essence, showing us the money, be a solution? It's probably not a bad idea. Or if members knew the full financial picture, would they stop paying tithes? Maybe. I don't understand that for a second. I don't get it for a second. But maybe. I really wonder if that is an issue for the church, if they're worried about that. I hope not. You put your faith in the law of God and you roll with it. And the people that are going to galvanize behind it, regardless of these types of news items, are going to galvanize behind it, and maybe even more. And those that aren't. But you follow what needs to be done. You follow the law of God. What is we at here? So about 12 days ago, we had this come out as well. Investigate the LDS Church for tax fraud. IRS whistleblower urges U.S. Senate. New complaint says the Utah-based faith has dodged more than $20 billion in taxes. So, and then you have to ask yourself, well, is there any way this is all coordinated? Maybe not. Maybe it's just one fire begets another. But this is similar in reporting issues, but this has to do with the IRS. Right? How would you dodge that? Well, this is where we get back to, this is Peggy Fletcher Stack and Tony Semerad. Sorry, Tony, if I didn't get that right. Semerad. Here's what this article says. A self-described whistleblower whose December 2019 complaint to the IRS set off a firestorm of debate. This is what we were talking about 3 years ago, about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints stashes and spends tens of billions of dollars. Great. Happy about it. Is now taking his fraud allegations to the U.S. Senate. In a 90-page document submitted to the Senate Finance Committee, I have not gone into that yet, and its subcommittee on taxes and IRS oversight, David A. Nielsen shares what he says is evidence of false statements, systematic accounting fraud, and violations of tax laws and other federal statutes by Ensign Peak Advisors, the Utah-based faith's investment arm. Okay? All right, so let's just go on here a little bit with these quotes of what they're saying. This is the guy that was the whistleblower 3 years ago who was not happy about it and then wanted I believe this is the same guy that filed a lawsuit wanting to get all of his tithing back, right? All of his tithing back. So I think he's kind of disenfranchised himself from the church and everything he'd paid in tithing because they already had so much, he wanted to get paid everything back. It says here, it is clear that EPA, Ensign Peak Advisors, has never been tax exempt, he wrote to the committee. As a result, EPA improperly has reaped billions in untaxed income that should have been taxed and is thus liable to the U.S. Treasury for billions in unpaid tax and penalties. Now, keep in mind, Nielsen worked with EPA. He was there. He's privy to a lot of information here on how things were managed. So he asserts that $20 billion in taxes, they've dodged over $20 billion in taxes from mostly the City Creek development and from the the beneficial life insurance company. Now, among Nielsen's new accusations in his Senate filing against EPA, he says it frequently deleted assets from its accounting system over the course of a decade and deceptively continued the practice even after Nielsen brought it to the attention of senior managers. Okay, that would be very interesting, right? What they deleted assets or did not record them, did not file them, did not include them on filing. I don't know. It says also it lacked internal controls on those managers and their handling of cash and engaged in a sham audit at one point. Interesting. All that left the firm susceptible to financial malfeasance, he says, while also offering strong evidence of accounting fraud and the possibility that Ensign Peak Advisors officials benefited privately from their actions. That would be interesting. Was there personal motivation from officials with Ensign Peak Advisors where they were able to enrich themselves off of these deals? Wow, that would be something. It told portfolio managers that it was hiding its ownership of nearly $32 billion in investments by filing reports with federal regulators more than 260 times under the names of a series of limited liability corporations instead of its own. That's what the church is agreeing to. They say that that is what they did. EPA's chief information officer later acknowledged using the ruse because the firm wanted to avoid attention that would be potentially damaging. Okay, again, here's the question, is why? That's my question. Why is the church feels that there are things that are potentially damaging? I mean, according to this and the way that they're framing it in the Salt Lake Tribune here, they are saying that these things are potentially damaging in the sense that if there's a knowledge that they are there. What does that mean? It goes on and says it made false statements and other non-disclosures to the IRS to conceal its vast business enterprise, including its ownership and authority over a series of foreign accounts valued in the billions. Okay, so I will tell you, I have dealt with this as well. There are different filing regulations involved with money overseas and for accounts that are in foreign account or accounts that are foreign. There's a separate filing form for this, and it's taxed in different ways. Sometimes, depending on what you have, there are things to do here actually with insurance that do help with tax issues. I don't know exactly where this is going with this. And is this just a disenfranchised member that wants to get back at the church? Or is this legitimate? Are all these things real? And if so, is the IRS going to be after the church for major bucks, right? Its actions taken in total amount to criminal violations, he's claiming, including fraud, conspiracy, perjury, and tax evasion. That is major. Those are major issues. Wow, that's a major issue. Here's a question that I'm going to bring up here. Let's see if we've got, I don't know if this goes over all of the dollar amounts here. But despite being among the world's largest investment funds, Ensign Peak Advisors functioned largely unseen until late 2019, when Nielsen first alleged to the IRS that the Utah firm had amassed a $100 billion reserve portfolio using church donations intended for, but never spent on charity in violation of tax laws. Here is a big question, right? Let's say, what are the church's goals? Obviously, the tax status is an important thing for them. And so the money that is actually brought in from donations is supposed to be used for expenses and for charitable purposes within the religion. But what if you're trying to amass a large amount of money for a rainy day fund and maybe create income producing assets within that fund? Kind of like, think of a retirement account. You can often, I had clients that would get condominiums, complexes, or apartment buildings, or trailer parks, and they'd end up being able to put them into a retirement account. And these are income producing, income producing properties, assets that continue to grow tax-free inside of a retirement fund until you actually pull the money out. So you can amass this amount of money for your retirement with this income being produced by these income-producing properties. But what is the church's goal? Is it just a rainy day fund? Do they want to have this money for something else? Do they need it to build Zion? Seriously, do they need this? Do they feel the need to have the money to build Zion at one point? And I'm talking a physical land development of Zion. What is there? Wouldn't that be fascinating just to sit in one of these meetings and know the purpose of this? Is it just to amass as much just in case? Are there is there a real purpose that they have beyond that? The problem is, do you need to use all of this for charitable purposes? And if so, if you're amassing all of these assets, how do you use that for? How do you use that money in charitable purposes? Is it for future charity? Can you claim that? I don't know. This is going to be very interesting. I'm actually much more concerned and interested in this IRS complaint than I am with the SEC. The SEC is nothing. That could go beyond. There might be more, but that is not a criminal issue. That is not a tax issue. That is a fine issue. That is a regulatory body. And the $5 million is nothing to the church. It's nothing, right? So this is different. This is very different. Now, here's what he says here. Nielsen asserted in his IRS complaint that Ensign Peak Advisors spent $2 billion to benefit private interests, namely two church-owned commercial enterprises. So that's the development of City Creek Center, right, and Beneficial Life. So that is to benefit these private interests, so to speak. In other words, these companies, not individuals at this point. Latter-day Saint leaders rejected the accusation, stating in a news release that the church complies with all applicable law governing our donations, investment, taxes, and reserves. I am going to lean at this point with the church on this. That doesn't mean there's a few skeletons in there somewhere. I mean, we're talking about a lot of money and a very complex system of reporting and filing and asset protection and growth and charitable contributions and expenditures. I'm not going to say there's not a problem there, but again, does it make any sense to you that the church purposefully is trying to conduct tax evasion and trying to get around the SEC and et cetera, right? I don't, that's just hard for me to really go along with here at this point, all right? This is what else they say here. They also insisted that money for the commercial ventures came from earnings on invested reserve funds rather than the tithing donations themselves. Now, that's an important statement to make for the members, but it's also possibly an important statement to make for the IRS. I don't know how that works. Again, we're talking about income producing. If you've got the donations brought in here, is there a separate level of finance that goes beyond the actual donations? In other words, you're amassing all of these donations. You know, they pull in a lot of donations globally, right, on tithing and more. And then if those are in a fund, obviously it would be responsible to have them in some type of an interest-bearing, dividend-paying, yield-paying, whatever it is, fund where there's some growth in that. Does that mass up and mass up and mass up, and then you take that money that is pulled from returns on that tithing money and open up a separate fund with it? And so if I've got over 20, 30 years, let's say, I'm bringing in, who knows, $1 billion a year. And then I've got interest growing on top of all of that. And we're amassing this additional income that has come not from the donations, or not from donations, but from the donations that they've already collected. Is that taxed differently? Is that viewed differently by the IRS? I don't know the answer to that. And then that money that was grown by investment, and their returns, are you then able to use that and go out and buy and develop City Creek Center and buy a life insurance company and go from there? Or is it all sitting under the same umbrella? I don't know the answer to that. Church officials also have said that the rainy day reserves are intended to help pay for operations in poor parts of the world and to see the nearly 17 million member faith through economic downturn. So they are claiming right here that $100 billion or down as low as $30 billion or $50 billion, I've seen those numbers, is a rainy day fund. That's what it's for. Now, additionally, the Senate can act on this. So you've got the Senate Finance Committee. You've got Senator Ron Wyden, who's a Democrat from Oregon, and its ranking minority member, Senator Mike Crapo of Idaho, who is also a Latter-day Saint, right? They can respond to this. The Senate can investigate this. There could be hearings on this. There could be Senate hearings on this. Not good for the church. That would not be good for the church. Now, the guy here from the other article with the SEC, Sam Brunson here, is saying that Nielsen's Senate filing is purely a publicity stunt. That would make more sense to me, right? That would make a lot more sense to me, that this is just all to get out there. He's got an axe to grind with the church. He's disenfranchised from them. I believe he had a lawsuit previously asking for all his tithing back, which was dismissed. I think that might be on appeal, however. It has been sent to the committee, Brunson said, but that's meaningless because there's no formal submission policy. If it gets opened, it'll be ignored because this isn't the kind of thing, frankly, that Senate Finance is going to be interested in, and they're under no obligation to do anything, okay? So, there could be an awful lot of smoke here for a small little fire. We just don't know the answer to this. Now, lastly, let's go over to the Deseret News and see what they have to say about this. Now, I want to go back to the numbers a little bit on this. You have, how much did Ensign Peak have? Well, this is back to the original Salt Lake Tribune article. Emerging just weeks after a whistleblower filed a complaint with the IRS about Ensign Peak's practices, that first combined quarterly report to the SEC in early 2020 valued its account at $37.8 billion, with more than 1,600 separate stock and mutual fund holdings. So in early 2020, so this is back when the whistleblower came out and said there's a $100 billion fund. Here they filed a report for $37.8 billion. Now, the rest of it, that $60+ billion, could be in those shell companies. It could be in those new LLCs, right? Since that time, the church's Tuesday release stated 13 quarterly reports have been filed in full accordance with the SEC requirements. That's the over 3-year period. Now, here's what's kind of interesting. It says here, in recent years, Ensign Peak's public portfolio has seen its overall worth rise and fall with the swings of the stock market. Remember, huge swings with COVID. It plummeted to $29.9 billion in the grips of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020. So this is back, to give you an idea, with the Dow Jones, for example, this thing, it plummeted down to about 18,000 in March in 2020. I mean, within a 3-week period, it lost 40%. And then it plateaus in late 2021. So a year and a half later, a little more than a year and a half, it plateaus at $52.3 billion for the Ensign Peak. Now, my question is, where is the $100 billion this guy was talking about 3 years ago? Is that in cash? Because you see here in early 20, and it plateaued at $52.3 billion in late 2021. Now look at these numbers. Look at the Dow Jones, right? That's a fairly good place to go for the church. It's blue chip type of companies. It's only 30 companies, but it's more along the lines, if they're in a lot of stock and mutual funds, it's more along the lines of the type of things that they're going to be in. You could look at the S&P 500, which is going to be much broader of an index. That's going to include a lot more and is a better actual gauge of the market than the Dow Jones is. But when the Dow Jones went down to 18,000, The S&P went down to 2,200. Right? It's a different number. 2,200. What's important is the difference. And then in late 2021, the Dow Jones goes up, doubles, right? It goes up to 36 plus in late 2021, and the S&P 500 goes up to 4,700, more than doubling, which is what the market did because you have more aggressive stock in there. What I'm interested in here, with an investment background here, is that 29.9 billion going to 52.3 billion a year and a half later, the market doubles on the Dow Jones. On a broader market, it more than doubles. Here, their number went from 30 billion to 52 billion. So they had an increase of, 22. Let's put that at roughly 22 off of that. Was that about a 73% increase on their portfolio? So that is going to give them, just from an idea of how they invest, it seems that they have got it's actually still much more aggressive than I would have anticipated, let's say. Now, there might be a lot of belief in that kind of a volatile market, and the managers are looking at it and saying, look, we're only going up from here, so we can get a little bit more aggressive with things. But you have a 70+% increase over a period where the S&P has a 100% increase. Remember, that's just pure stock. That's not a balanced portfolio. That's still an aggressive portfolio, and the S&P would be even more aggressive. And so, at 70% there, you're looking at a decently, that's a moderate to a moderate plus type of a portfolio, it seems to me. I would have expected something a little bit different in terms of the conservative level of the investment on that. But again, maybe they managed it well and they knew where things were going, or felt good about where things were going in the future as the market was recovering. The latest SEC filing values Ensign Peak's public fund at $44.4 billion at the end of 2022. So again, the question is that just what's in Ensign Peak Advisors, or does that include, which it should, right? Because the last 3 years they've been doing it all under Ensign Peak. Does that include the other shell companies' assets, or what they were filing under the other shell company assets previously? Because if that's the case, they are, unless they just lost a ton of money in COVID, in that loss, they sold off in that 3-week period, and went to cash and then bought in later after it had gone back up. That is a far, far cry from the $100 billion that the whistleblower was talking about. I still have no numbers here that I see that are anywhere near $100,000. Now, back to the Deseret News to finish this off. I just want to go over a little bit more about what the church is saying on this. Here is their press release. It says, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the company that manages its stock investments have agreed to pay a combined $5 million offer of settlement for past financial reporting practices in an order released Tuesday by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. The church and its affiliate, Ensign Peak Advisors, adjusted their practices in 2019, so over 3 years ago, after learning about SEC concerns and complied with rules that require them to disclose the church's entire stock portfolio in a single set of quarterly filing forms, the SEC said. So they were doing it separately previous to that. They are considered to be in complete compliance. That would be now. So that's a bold statement. The settlement relates to how the forms were filed previously. Ensign Peak and the church have cooperated with the government over a period of time as we sought resolution. We affirm our commitment to comply with the law, regret mistakes made, and now consider this matter closed. So the Deseret News goes on to say that they've cooperated fully with the SEC on discussions with the commission and offered the settlement, etc. So that money needs to be paid within the next 10 days, based off of what the SEC has required here. So we're going to stop with that. So anyway, I know that's a little bit of I probably got into that a little bit deeper than you might have expected. So if you're still with me at this point, you've got a fairly decent understanding of what's going on financially now, or with this financial storm that's happening with the church. I would lean toward it is what the church says it is, with maybe a few mistakes, right? That's where I would go with this to start off. But we're going to find out more. And if the IRS has an issue, they've got an issue. But I think there's a lot of smoke here, a lot of smoke that's out there against the church, and a lot of people rooting that this is a major problem for the church to have, of course. We'll obviously follow up with this, but again, I want them to have a huge fund. I want it to be bigger. I wish it was 10 times bigger than whatever it is. It's not just a rainy day in my mind. It goes well beyond that. And the church is the organization that I trust more than any other organization on earth, with money or anything else. That doesn't mean they're perfect. That doesn't mean they don't have problems. Nobody is saying that. But I trust my money going to them than I do any other charity. I know how efficient they run things. I know the responsibility that they take. Let's build that fund up bigger. I want it as big as can possibly be. And stop worrying about tithing. Please. Don't worry about the tithe. That has nothing to do with it. That is that's not just for the church. That's for you. And it really is. That's my belief. And that's what I have experienced. That is not something so that the church can just stay afloat. That is something that is a law that is also there to bless you. And there is nothing better than feeling that you are invested in a part of the greatest cause on earth. Don't lose that, right? Don't lose that. Thanks for listening.